So this is the first of our Lent series. I can't remember what we called it. We called it Solidarity in Dangerous Times. And the sort of rationale of it is that our theme for Lent in Union Chapel is faith under fire. And the sort of idea behind it is that we look at what are the contemporary challenges to people of faith and how people of faith are responding to them, and also how we as a Christian community should be engaging with those issues. And we have, apart from our Sunday services on that theme, we also have these open Wednesday evenings, open space evenings on Wednesdays. And last week we had Julia Brick, forgot her second name, Julia, who is a journalist, and spoke about, very interesting, talking about persecution of Christians in the world. And she gave the sort of more obvious examples, but did say that something I found really interesting was that in a lot of countries, the Christian missionaries had engaged and evangelized within the poorer communities. And those poorer communities, like the Dalits in India, are majority Christian, but still experiencing, the kind of discrimination because of a caste or because of their economic status. So even though it isn't the kind of traditional way in which we think of the persecution of Christians, she was highlighting how a lot of Christian people throughout the world are actually discriminated against, which kind of puts a new gloss on it for me, because I've always kind of had a slight nervousness around the issues around persecution of Christians and so on, because it's taken up so enthusiastically by right-wing people who use it as a means of attacking people of other faiths. But one of the things Julia said, which I thought was also really interesting, was that in fact it becomes a right-wing issue because the left-wing ignore it. And we tend to gloss over it or put it in the background. But nevertheless, the reality is that people are persecuted as Christians. But then, of course, there are the counter side to that as well, where there are communities where it is the church that is behaving as the oppressor. So if you think about Uganda or Kenya or Ghana or Nigeria, where LGBTQ communities are under severe attack with all of the propaganda of the church, working against them. Then we can look at communitarian violence in countries where Christian versus Hindu, and she talked a bit about Modi in India and how Hindu nationalism was at work there, and also I think how sometimes just for ourselves, as Christians, more radical Christians, looking at how we deal with the prevailing zeitgeist, which is where faith itself is marginalized per se, because it's not seen as anything that is relevant to a modern world, modern society, seen as being a throwback or a historic anomaly that we're still around. So I think that's the sort of general framework of what we're exploring. And then, of question for these sessions is, what does it mean to be in solidarity with people who are, challenged because of their faith or whatever? Graham. That's very good. Hi, Graham. Hi there. We've just started. I was just saying about our theme for Lent being looking at all the challenges that people have, which impact on people of faith, and that our theme for these sessions would be around solidarity and the concept of solidarity from a Christian perspective. And just by a very brief introduction, but the term solidarity is one which hasn't traditionally been part of Christian theology, at least until more modern times. But it's entered into, I think, Christian thinking through Catholic social teaching. In the 1930s, it would be perhaps before, that the church sort of took up the issues of workers' rights and thought about the importance of trade unions, the importance of workers having the right to collectively organise. And so it comes into Catholic social teaching and was reinforced when John Paul II became Pope, because he came from Poland, and the word solidarity had a particular impact for him because of the Solidarność. And then you can also look at the sociological definitions, people like Durkheim talking about this shared feeling, people being joined together by religious beliefs, lifestyles, training, familiar bonds. You can delve into, if you want to, you could delve into Marxist-Leninist theory about collective organizing against the capitalist mode of production, or you could look at those kind of communitarian ideas, which argues that the focus of ethics should not be on the individual, but should be on the community and the collective. And you get concepts like the common good, and focus on contractual duties within society. And then you can also go, and interestingly enough, on this day, you can go to the EU and look at the Charter of Fundamental Rights in the EU, which has a number of kind of core pillars: dignity, freedom, equality, solidarity, citizens' rights, and justice. But when you look at the fundamental rights under the heading solidarity in the EU Declaration, Charter rather, of Fundamental Rights, it's all about labour rights, workers' rights, and so on, and doesn't really extend beyond that. So there's a sense in which this is a very modern concept, which relates to other big ideas: responsibility, charity, dignity, altruism, reciprocity, social capital, trust, all those big themes, big ideas. And whether or not within them, within contemporary thinking, there is enough, and whether or not we should just be satisfied with those kind of thoughts about solidarity, or whether or not we shouldn't be saying, actually, is there something more in the Christian tradition that can be teased out and that can be relevant and meaningful in our world? And is there anything in the Bible which then moves us into something which is quite distinctively Christian in the understanding of what solidarity is and how it should be. That's what was going to be a brief introduction, but wasn't brief at all. But how does that sound? Any initial thoughts on those ideas? So should we move into? Then we can move into a Bible passage.
Just to say, I think the word solidarity is, as you say, really, really important, and probably sums up the New Testament message more than we've often realized. I'm sure we'll have more to say about that in due course.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yes. Yes, I mean, I think I was about to say something very similar, which is that that there is a feeling, there is a concept of solidarity, particularly in the New Testament, but it's a concept of solidarity in which God stands in solidarity with us.
Yes.
And very and in situations very often in which solidarity between human beings is non-existent or dysfunctional, or all of those sorts of things. And I think also and if we want to see where that fits in with the sociology of work, then probably Karl Marx is a good place to start. In that that the contemporary concept of solidarity is a bit naive, and that there's a lot of assumptions that solidarity just emerges.
Yes.
When people are together and reading, either Isaiah or reading Marx. There is they both have very strong messages about why this is not actually, doesn't actually work as it stands.
Yes. And I think there's a critique as well of this kind of communitarian and the common good ideas as well, that you put a circle around a community and you create strong bonds within that community, but actually that community then doesn't realize the extent to which it has been exclusive and become exclusive, and who is outside those communities, so on. So there's in a sense, there's good in all of these concepts of solidarity, but they don't quite take you to where you want to be. Should we? I thought today, in a way, this might be a negative approach to the theme at the start, but I thought we'd look at the story of Cain and Abel, right at the very beginning of Genesis, which is a fantastic story. Where is it? In itself, but one that poses some of the big questions of who we are in relationship to each other. Would somebody like to read it, or do you want me to do it?
I'll read it.
Thank you.
So from chapter 1, verse 1.
Yeah.
And Adam knew Eve his wife, and she conceived and bare Cain, and said, I have gotten a man from the Lord. And she again bare his brother Abel. And Abel was the keeper of sheep, but Cain was the tiller of the ground. And in process of time it came to pass that Cain brought of the fruit of the ground an offering unto the Lord. And Abel he also brought of the firstlings of his flock, and the fat thereof. And the Lord had respect unto Abel and to his offering. But unto Cain and to his offering he had not respect. And Cain was very wroth, and his countenance fell.
Can we just pause a minute? I think I've got.
I think you've got a wrong version. Yes.
I've got the. Yeah. Let me just. There's a way of doing this. Let me. Stop share. Let me. I've got the. I know why I've done it, because I was looking at King James for something else.
As I was reading it, I thought, this doesn't sound right.
Yeah, New Revised Standard Version there. Genesis 4:1 to 16. Yeah. Okay, so we go back to, where are we? Back to Zoom, and then hello O'Neill. I just messed up. Can you see that now?
Yep.
Okay, let's go on. Cain murders Abel. Whoa.
That looks better.
Yeah. Okay.
Right. Now the man knew his wife Eve, and she conceived and bore Cain, saying, I have produced a man with the help of the Lord. Next she bore his brother Abel. Now Abel was the keeper of sheep, and Cain a tiller of the ground. In the course of time, Cain brought to the Lord an offering of the fruit of the ground, and Abel for his part brought of the firstlings of his flock, their fat portions. And the Lord had regard for Abel and his offering, but for Cain and his offering he had no regard. So Cain was very angry, and his countenance fell. And the Lord said to Cain, Why are you angry, and why is your countenance fallen? If you do well, will you not be accepted? And if you do not do well, sin is lurking at the door. Its desire is for you, but you must master it. Cain said to his brother Abel, Let us go out to the field. And when they were in the field, Cain rose up against his brother Abel and killed him. Then the Lord said to Cain, Where is your brother Abel? He said, I do not know. Am I my brother's keeper? And the Lord said, What have you done? Listen, your brother's blood is crying out to me from the ground. And now you are cursed from the ground, which has opened its mouth to receive your brother's blood from your hand. When you till the ground, it will no longer yield to you its strength. You will be a fugitive and a wanderer on the earth. And Cain said to the Lord, My punishment is greater than I can bear. Today you have driven me away from the soil, and I shall be hidden from your face. I shall be a fugitive and a wanderer on the earth, and anyone who meets me may kill me. Then the Lord said to him, Not so. Whoever kills Cain will suffer a sevenfold vengeance. And the Lord put a mark on Cain, so that no one who came upon him would kill him. Then Cain went away from the presence of the Lord and settled in the land of Nod, east of Eden.
There we go. Great story. Just some initial points. Cain, I think, alludes to the Kenites, the Midianites. So Cain is the sort of father of the tribe. So a lot of these stories are really stories about what are the relationships between people. Remember, the Kenites, Midianites were nomads, and as is Cain at the end of this story. Moses' father-in-law was a priest of Midian, but there were good relationships. In 1 Samuel, David spares the Midianites because they've been nice to the Israelites. So this isn't, I think, intended to be self-congratulatory, you know, that the Kenites, the Canaanites, the descendants of Cain were suffering vengeance, were being punished because of Cain's misdeeds. It's more about a story in which we can all be Cain, we can all be Abel. just as we can all be Adam, we can all be Eve. That's the sort of way in which primeval history was written. And René Girard says, it's a story about the murderous them, but also about the murderous us. Any that's kind of big points, but any thoughts about the reading?
Only something bizarre, and it's reinforced by the way Peter read it. Whenever we get to the end of that bit of the text, I always think of Noggin the Nog. Does anyone remember Noggin the Nog?
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
So anyway, so that's completely bizarre. I mean, there's a lot of mythology and a lot of mythology that's come out of this story. There's John Steinbeck's novel East of Eden,
Yes.
which kind of references this whole idea of being cursed and being a wanderer. And it's a powerful thing, isn't it? I don't really know what to make of it.
Well, at the beginning, if you notice, quite interesting that the way in which Cain and Abel's names are interposed. First it's Cain, then it's Abel, then it's Abel, then it's Cain, then it's Cain, then it's Abel. So they're equal in the way in which there isn't a hierarchy between them. The word, interestingly as well, the word Cain means to produce, it means to bring forth. He's a farmer and producer of, he produces food. The name Abel means breath or vapor or worthlessness or nothingness. So you've got this contrast between these two brothers, the Cain being the rich farmer and Abel being the poor, what do you call them, nomad keeper of sheep. And but their sacrifices are different, and God reverses what Eve does. What Eve does is say, Cain, you're my third, you're my firstborn, and Abel is the lesser of the two by their naming. But God reverses that and values the sacrifice of Abel more than the sacrifice of Cain, which creates, creates this anger and jealousy on the part of Cain.
I'm intrigued by what this word regard actually means. And where it says, and the Lord had regard for Abel, but for Cain and his offering he had no regard. Yes, it's in verse 4 and 5. And I don't know if anyone knows or can say any more about that word. Because is it that, given what you've just said, Vaughan, is it that he is giving more attention to Abel because he's the less favoured one? And therefore it's a bit like the prodigal son, and Cain is kind of, well, he's got it all already anyway, so what's the problem? He doesn't need the God's regard. Or what? And that's just a thought. I've got no idea, because it always seems quite capricious, and why on earth is God like this? Why wouldn't Cain react the way he has?
Exactly. Well, I mean, there's a whole set of stories in the Old Testament about brothers, rivalries and brothers, and the prodigal son, which you've just mentioned. So there's Cain and Abel, Isaac and Ishmael, Jacob and Esau, Joseph and his brothers, David and his brothers, and it's usually the younger one who prevails, the younger one who is which may be a way of saying, Israel as the people who are under attack all the time.
Mm.
They're the ones who are favored with God, so they are the younger brother.
But
So
no
he-
one wins in this story, do they? Because Abel's dead and Cain gets banished.
No one wins now.
No.
No.
I've got the Jewish Study Bible here, and it
Mhm.
instead of paid regard, it talks about the Lord paid heed to Abel and his offering, but to Cain and his offering he paid no heed. So that's very similar, really. It's like God doesn't really notice. I mean,
Yes.
the impression I get looking at this is that it's in large part God's fault, because God's the one who shows seemingly arbitrary preference, and then wonders why it causes resentment, and whether the story is consciously or unconsciously just saying something about the fact that God does appear to show arbitrary preference for people, or certainly in their worldview would. I don't know, but it just seems odd, because you don't need that bit. You could equally well not bring God into it at all and just have one brother doing well, not one not doing well, and that would be equal motivation and less complicated.
Good point. Yeah, that's a really good point.
But God, because God's in the picture, and a fundamental part of the picture, you wonder, well, what's that actually trying to say?
Yeah.
I don't know. I'm going to have to look this up and speak to Old Testament scholars I know and try to find out what they think.
I mean, it smacks of Job.
Yeah.
And God in Job. And what I'm thinking not from a biblical scholarship point of view, but from a literary scholarship point of view and the storytelling point of view, is that this is much more ancient than a Hebrew text. That this goes back. This just feels like it goes back. It rings of similar writing to Job, and it's a story that's been told again and again, and it's almost like a creation story.
Oh, that's interesting.
Well, it immediately follows. I mean, it is east of Eden, of course, is exactly where Adam and Eve.
Yeah, exactly.
I sense, so yeah, it is. I mean, you've got this contrast between the two brothers. One is first, one is second, one is rich, one is poor, one is honored, one is despised, one is regarded, one is disregarded. I mean, so this rivalry between these two, and the actually takes people further away from God. It just moves them east of Eden. And yet, strangely enough, they're removed from God's presence. They're taken away from Eden, but they're not removed from God's care. So Cain, at the end there, is he's got the mark of Cain on him, and he's sent away from the presence of the Lord. But whoever kills Cain will suffer a sevenfold vengeance.
Well, you say that's God's care for him, but I mean, there's another way of interpreting it, which some writers have done since, which is more that Cain is like almost like a devil figure, in that you kill him, you're in trouble, and he can get you basically. And I mean, I can't remember which film it is, but there's one which has Cain as almost like this invincible figure because no one touches him.
Well, what is the mark of Cain? I mean, that's
Yes.
that's a big question. I mean,
Yes.
There's another opposition here, which is the opposition between staple foods and luxury foods. And the vegetables are what keeps people alive and what they eat most of the time. And in these societies, then people had meat very rarely.
Yes.
Are you suggesting, Graham, that Teresa Coffey was referencing this last week?
Very possibly.
But it's also about the sacrifice, isn't it? I mean, that what's being said here is that vegetable sacrifices are not up to it.
Yeah.
It's the meats. I mean, it goes back to other stories we've read, which have been looking at how the concept of sacrifice, as this kind of substitute for other things like human sacrifice, enters into the discourse in a way that wouldn't bother us, but it is what is the appropriate sacrifice is a big theme and a big issue in the Old Testament. Ending up with Hosea, I desire mercy and not sacrifice, the knowledge of God rather than burnt offerings, and so on. So that's a big debate which is irrelevant to us. We don't think about sacrifice as a major theme, a major issue, but what is the right sacrifice? And what is acceptable to God as a sacrifice, what isn't, was obviously an issue for the people of the time. What is the mark of Cain? Yes.
I was just going to say, unless I've overlooked something pretty clear and obvious in Genesis, I could be wrong. I think this is the first passage in Scripture in which there's any concept of death.
Well, yes, it would be. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, because Adam and Eve are still alive when this story starts. Yeah, it's true. And this concept of after. Actually, that's really interesting, Andy. I hadn't thought about this, but at the fall, death enters this world. That's one of the consequences of the eating of the tree. Yeah. Just on the mark of Cain, do you remember other marks? I mean, the mark on the doorposts, in Exodus, is a mark of protection. Do you remember Ezekiel? In Ezekiel chapter 9, let me find it. Now the glory of the God of Israel had gone up from the cherubim which it rested in the threshold of the house. The Lord called to the man clothed in linen who had writing case by his side and said to him, go through the city, through Jerusalem, and put a mark on the foreheads of those who sigh and groan over all the abominations that are committed to it. To the others he said, in my hand, pass through the city after him and kill, your eye shall not spare, and you shall show no pity. Cut down old men and young women and young women, children, but touch no one who has the mark. So, in other parts of Scripture, the mark is a sign of protection. It's rather than a condemnation, rather than it's not what do you call them, a hair. It's not a mark, as a target. It's a sign that God will protect.
Yes, so it's not a stigma.
It's not a stigma. No.
Which was a mark which made, which if you had it, you were treated badly.
Absolutely. I mean, and some people have said, well, is this mark a physical movement? Is it literally a mark, a sign, or whatever? What is that mark of Cain? We don't know, obviously. Interesting where this happens. Verse 8, Cain said to his brother Abel, let us go out to the field. And when they were in the field, Cain rose up against his brother Abel and killed him. So there's something here moving to our contemporary things. I mean, human rights activists in Argentina, there's a great film, Argentina 1983, I think it's called. It's on one of the channels now. And it's a lawyer who, I mean, it's about the start of the disappeared, so the people were taken out, from the society into the field, into the deserts, into places, where they would be they could be killed. It's places where they'll be undetected. There's no help, there's no witnesses, there's no communal judgments. This Abel is taken out. So it's the kind of location of sin, is the sin of Cain is away from scrutiny, which is a kind of question that we might want to ask in terms of that first question we were talking about, what's going on in our world and contemporary world, how much takes place without scrutiny, how much of the sin of the world takes place outside, where it isn't seen. You might say that about our media, how much of what goes wrong in the world is not looked at and seen and not pointed at by our media.
Yeah. Yes, I mean, most people would think there's probably only one war going on in the world at the moment, whereas we know there are many.
Exactly.
Wandering slightly off topic, I find the BBC World Service on the radio far more helpful than I find the television.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And what do we make of Cain? What is his approach to life and what he's done?
It's fairly black and white, isn't it? I can put it that way. If it's if God doesn't like me and he likes you, well, then I need to get rid of you so he'll like me again.
I mean, what a thing to say. I do not know. Well, he does know. I mean, he knows. That's for sure. He's just killed his brother, and so he knows where he is. And am I my brother's keeper? Is a joke. His brother was a keeper of sheep. So, he turns it around and says, he looks after his sheep, but am I looking after him?
Well, in some ways he should be, because he's the older brother.
Exactly. Yeah. What's that song, that 70s, 60s, 70s song? He ain't heavy, he's my brother.
Exactly, yes.
Yeah.
The answer is yes. He thinks it's a rhetorical question to which the answer is no. Like a brilliant piece of writing, of course, the answer is the opposite to what he thinks.
But there's a self-deception in there, isn't there?
But that's core, isn't it? I mean, that's a question that is at the heart of our society. That's what we all think. Aren't we the keepers of the people who are trying to cross the channel to get into our country?
Yeah.
Yes, of course we are.
Yeah.
No, but our government says it's illegal to do that, which it isn't. There's no such thing as illegal migration. It's a human right. Yeah. And we've signed the United Nations Declaration of Human Rights, in which it's named as a human right. But we have a Home Secretary who's supposed to be the arbiter of the law, who tells us it's illegal. I mean, it's laughable how deep this goes. Not laughable, that's not the right word. It's abhorrent how deep this goes.
There he is, I mean, in a sense, if this is reflective of our modern society and our contemporary world and the way in which we're in denial about climate change, in denial about human rights, in denial of the fact that wars are taking place in Afghanistan and Iran and Iraq and Eritrea and Ukraine and so on. So, and we've just given, agreement to people of Hong Kong that they can come and live here. And we're in denial, that people are going to come here and need the space and so on. So our brother's blood is crying out,
yes,
from the ground. I mean, That is our condition. We deny something big, and so, and the consequence for Cain, he loses his brother, he loses the possibility of belonging on his land, he loses his land, he loses his farm. His land is now inhospitable. He has to move. He is killed and now may be killed. And he refuses to look up to God in the first place, and now he's hidden from God's face. Cain went away from the presence of the Lord. He's self-excluded, and he's banished to the unpredictability of the fear of the nomad. Belonging is home. Belonging is home, and home is brother. So in that sense, how much is our modern society a nomadic society, even though we may be settled, but how much are we in some way east of Eden? Is this world, how much are we at east of Eden at the moment, given everything that's going on?
But is that you've hit the nail on the head, Vaughan, really, because our modern society, we just talk about this country, is based so much on ownership of property and land. And so people feel that their security, they have it if they own their own home. And therefore this is irrelevant to them because this will never happen. And for that reason, we've kind of denied God in this. We said we don't need him because we're okay. This doesn't apply to us, but it will. And maybe this is our fear of migration because we know that that is a problem and it will cause a problem here. Well,
yes.
To be honest, I think it brings more solutions than problems, but
right.
You can see that the fear mongering behind it, that there'll be too many people in this country. Where will I live?
We did say in the 1970s, during the period of Africanization, as it was called, we said to the Kenyan nations and the Ugandan nations, well, if your countries won't have you, your home countries won't have you, you must come here and stay with us.
Yes.
And the National Front went bonkers.
Yes. Yes. But are we beyond it? Are we beyond that attitude? I don't know that we are. In some ways we are, but I think it's still there.
But it's that question, where is your brother? And, we don't know. I mean, where are our brothers from, and sisters from Eritrea or whatever? They're walking to Libya. They're crossing the Mediterranean, and so I think the truth is we often will have to answer, I don't know.
This does bring us also back to solidarity, where we started, doesn't it? There's a lack of solidarity in this story and in our society, probably.
A lack of humanity.
Yes. Yeah.
Yes. The more you think about this, worse this gets.
It's a pretty devastating story, actually. And it kind of links in with the stuff that goes before it. I mean, it is part of the story of the fall and the human condition, which is really described in those first 12 chapters of 11 chapters of Genesis, through the story of Noah, the story of the Tower of Babel, and so on. And I think at one point there's another murder, isn't there? In chapter 4, let me just find it. Shortly afterwards, there's this guy Lamech. For some reason or other, Lamech said to his wives, Ada and Zillah, hear my voice, you wives of Lamech, listen to what I say. I have killed a man for wounding me, a young man for striking me. If Cain is avenged sevenfold, truly Lamech 77-fold. So a little bit later on in the same chapter, a descendant of Cain is boasting that he's killed somebody and he's going to have an even worse situation than Cain. He's going to be avenged 77-fold, you know.
I suppose that's illustrating how violence multiplies. So once it happens once, it's
yeah.
I mean, very effectively, really. It doesn't just not just 1 + 1. It's more than that.
Yeah.
And there are your teenage gangs, you know. You have to prove yourself to be tougher than, and therefore, you know, more violent than, you know, the people who went before you, or, you know, whatever, to have this macho kind of thing. You know? Yeah.
Going back to the passage we got, I still can't help wondering if verse 7 should be there, because it seems much more moralistic than the rest of the story and a bit irrelevant. And it would read just as well going from verse 6 to verse 8. I can't quite work out what the point of verse 7 is, really.
Yeah. I mean, this idea, I mean, it's not the devil, you know, there's no devil in the Hebrew Bible.
At this stage.
It could refer to animals. It is crouching, is lurking at the door. Apparently there was a demon in Babylonian texts called the Croucher. So it's possible that it could be a reference to.
That sounds horrible.
The Croucher.
That's
sounds
a
like
horror story, that.
An East End gangster, doesn't it?
Yes.
But it could also refer to the sheep. Animals are referred to as lurking in the Bible, a crouching animal, you know, crouching tiger, I think this idea. So it could well be a kind of play on words in relationship to the sheep offering. I don't know. Yeah. I mean, the idea of sin lurking at the door. It desires for you, but you won't master it. I mean, the idea. Yeah, I mean, it is. You know, Cain's face falls. His countenance falls. You know, he can't look at God anymore. If you do well, will you not be accepted? If you do not do well, sin is lurking at the door. It desires for you, and you must master it. So maybe this is about. Yeah, if that's, I understand it now, if that word sin is about the sin offering and the animal is there, the sin offering is available for you. So you can do the same as Abel. You could have brought a sheep offering as well, and then you would have mastered what was needed. You know, this is again what is the proper sacrifice kind of idea. I think that's what some people think it's trying to say.
Is that fair if Cain is a tiller of the ground and Abel is the keeper of sheep? You know, it wouldn't occur to him, would it?
No.
Well, that's another question, whether or not this is also a story about the rivalry between the pastoralists and the nomads. Which is I mean, you're talking about migration, you know, I mean, the settled communities and the nomads, you know, which is a big theme in all of human history, in which we're seeing now. I mean, the settled community versus the transient community. So, I mean, I mean, the big point, I guess, is that to have a brother, you must be a brother. And to have a brother, you must keep a brother. Let me just share something else very briefly at the end here. I mean, just some references to this story elsewhere. I mean, in Wisdom of Solomon, which is not in the Protestant Bible, but in the Catholic Bible, it says, wisdom protected the firstborn father of the world, that's Adam, when he alone had been created. She, that's wisdom, delivered him from his transgression and gave him the strength to rule all things. Then, but when an unrighteous man departed from her in his anger, he perished because in rage he killed his brother. When the earth was flooded because of him, wisdom again saved it, steering the righteous man by a paltry piece of wood, that's Noah. So in the wisdom literature, you know, the behavior of Cain is seen as unrighteous behavior and a lack of wisdom. It takes place because of that lack of wisdom. And then a couple of interesting contemporary, I mean, not contemporary anymore, but Elie Wiesel, who was, of course, in the concentration camp. Mean, ugly, they talk about this story, mean, ugly, immoral, oppressive. Their story disturbs and frightens. It haunted humankind then, and it still does, working its way into our nightmares. That comes from Auschwitz. And then a human rights champion, Rabbi Marshall Meyer, in Argentina during the dictatorship, spoke about his own nightmares, provoked by the plight of the disappeared and their relatives. The indeterminate fate of a disappeared person keeps the relatives and society in general trapped in a confused nightmare of anxious hope and denied sorrow. The bad dream is even scarier. If looking around the world, it appears that if all men are brothers, the ruling model is Cain and Abel. And lastly, 1 John 3. So this is the message we have heard from the beginning, that we should love one another. We must not be like Cain, who was from the evil one and murdered his brother. Why did he murder him? Because his own deeds were evil and his brother's righteous. Do not be astonished, brothers and sisters, that the world hates you. We know that we have passed from death to life because we love one another. Whoever does not love abides in death. All who hate a brother or sisters are murderers. You know that murderers do not have eternal life abiding in them. We know love by this, that he laid down his life for us, and we ought to lay down our lives for one another. How does God's love abide in anyone who has the world's goods and sees a brother or sister in need and yet refuses help? So in a way, what we, you know, this first look at Bible text around solidarity is a very negative theology that we've just created. You know, solidarity is not Cain. Solidarity is not Cain and Abel. But you know, people have been able to recognise the devastation of the world. But you know, in the end, it translates, as we see in 1 John, to if that's the negative, then we know what we don't want. You know, if Cain was not his brother's keeper, then we know that we should be our brother's keeper. You know, that's the way in which that negative theology, you know, has to work. Turn it around, and so you get, you know, Cain's the mark of Cain, you know, was that he was, remember, the Lord said to him, not so, whoever kills Cain will suffer a sevenfold vengeance. And Lamech, you know, in chapter 4, has a 70 times 70-fold vengeance. But Matthew, you know, how many times shall I forgive my brother? Not 7, but 70 times 7, you know. So this shifting around, you know, we just have to turn the whole story of Cain and Abel on its head and say, that's not how we should be, but it should be something else. You know. How's that?
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Amazing story, isn't it?
Nice.